Hi students, this is your instructor Megan, and in this lecture I'd like to talk about platforms and postures, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about Web 2.0. It's important to remember that when Cooper was writing about Face, he was writing in the 90s, and his first edition was published in 1995. In 2007, he published the third edition, which is what we're looking at in this course, which was updated to reflect all the massive changes to the digital landscape that had happened over the last, oh gosh, it was 12 years. But it's important to remember as well that in 2007, when About Face 3 was published, the iPhone came out, and it was the first smartphone, and it was a completely new platform, and it introduced the idea of mobile apps and an app store. And when Cooper was writing About Face 3, that did not exist. So it's important to remember that he's writing before the advent of a really important platform. So I want to talk about platforms and postures, and then I want to talk a little bit about Web 2.0 and what it means for mobile and kind of how things have changed since About Face 3 was published. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to do is remind you about where we are in the process. So in the goal-directed design process, you've now done some research, some modeling, some requirements definition, and you're moving into design framework. So after you come up with the requirements for what your digital product does, you start thinking about how do we meet those requirements? What kind of designed products will meet that? What kind of information? What kind of functions? What kind of design patterns? And then you sketch those out. And then in the third step, key path and validation scenarios, you look at what you've come up with, these ideas you have, and you kind of compare them to what you think your users expect, and see if maybe what you've made is fitting what they can expect to accomplish their goals. Now, I want to talk a little bit about another way of looking at this interaction design process. The goal-directed design process is just one type of interaction design process. It's just one framework. Interaction design can be done in a multitude of ways. All of the different ways of doing it have some things in common. So Cooper's goal-directed design process is a really specific way of doing interaction design. Other people have come up with other really specific ways. But what all of those different ways of doing interaction design have in common are what we're looking at here in this diagram. All different interaction design processes or user-centered design processes start with users and understanding requirements. And then from there, we create design alternatives. And then we prototype them, which means we make examples of them, and then we evaluate them to see if they actually accomplish the requirements and help users complete their goals. So Cooper does have this built into the goal-directed design process. In this process, we come up with requirements, and this is all the work you do to come up with those requirements, and then you start coming up with alternatives and then prototype them and try them out to see if they fit users. So here, this last step of design framework involves trying them out, and then you try it out, you try those designs out again a couple more times at the bottom. And you can see at the top, he's sort of directing the whole thing. You design, you build, and then you try it out. And that's exactly what's happening here. You design, you understand, you design, you build, and then you try it out. But the reason I want to bring this up is because in your next few courses, 375 and 495, you will use this sort of overall interaction design process. You're not going to use Cooper's super specific method. You're going to do the same kinds of things, but you're not going to be presented with his complete method again. So I want to kind of explain what's happening here, how what you're going to do in the future is what you're doing now. You're just going to be not as specific as Cooper is in terms of every step that you go one, he's got all these different steps. You're not going to do every single one of these in those next couple of courses. And so you need to be familiar with this overall concept. Cooper's goal-directed design is just one kind of interaction design process that's doing this. And so what's interesting here is that Cooper's not really calling out the design alternatives section very explicitly. He very explicitly says you need to do requirements, you need to do prototypes, you need to evaluate, but he doesn't really use the word alternatives very often. Actually, well, I think he does a couple times, but not very often throughout about phase 3. So I want to kind of tell you what that's about. So last week you did create some design alternatives. When I asked you to come up with functional requirements, those were your design alternatives. And if you'll remember last week's video, one of the requirements was, for my museum example, was that users be able to use whatever the product was to find out where they were and how to find things in the museum. And the functional requirements that I came up with from that were things like Google Maps or MapQuest, different tools that I could use. And I listed more than one. I came up with a couple ideas for that. And so those are alternatives. I could use Google Maps, I could use MapQuest, I could use something else. Those are all available to me and they all fulfill the requirements, so they're alternatives. And now as I step into figuring out how to make the thing that meets the requirements, I might come up with 4 or 5 different ideas. So the ideas could be as broad as maybe it's a mobile app, maybe it's iPads that are glued into the walls that people can touch as they go through the museum. So all different alternatives that meet the requirements. And the thing about alternatives to remember is that you're always doing them. ABD, always be doing. You're thinking about them really all the time. As soon as you have requirements, you're coming up with alternatives. Alternatives for platform, alternatives for posture, alternatives for functional requirements. And they're always conceptual. So they're not things like, is the app going to be mostly blue and red, or is it mostly going to be green and yellow? That doesn't make a difference. They're conceptual, well, it does, but it's not enough of a difference. The conceptual alternatives are conceptual because we're talking about, are we using a map program that gives turn-by-turn directions like Google Maps and can do directions inside, or are we using some other system like just an image of a map that people can look at that's not interactive in that way? Those are 2 different concepts. So design alternatives, you've already started to do them. You're going to continue doing them in the next couple weeks as you sketch different layouts. You're going to come up with alternative layouts, and then in the last half of the class when you come up with a product, you're going to consider alternative platforms and alternative postures. So I just want to explain that a little bit more clearly because we're using a very specific interaction design process, the goal-directed design process that Cooper came up with, but it's part of a larger idea of what interaction design processes offer. They all have user requirements, design alternatives, prototyping, and evaluation. So I just wanted to get that in there because I think Cooper doesn't quite call out the alternatives as much as I would like, although if you know about alternatives and you go back and you look at what he's come up with, you can start to see where those alternatives are. He just doesn't label them clearly. Okay, so this week we're going to move into a framework definition. We're going to explore alternatives a little bit more, and again, you'll do that whole process over as you create your product for your final project. So let's talk about platforms. What is a platform? Well, from your reading, a platform is a combo of hardware and software. So a specific kind of hardware and software combination that helps users accomplish their goal. And platforms are differentiated by user interaction and product function. So what they do and how they're used helps us understand that this platform is different from this platform. So this platform does this and is used this way. That's clearly different from this other one that does this and is used this way. So a couple examples of platforms that have different user interaction types and different product functions. Desktop software are different from websites, are different from web applications, are different from kiosks, are different from mobile phones and mobile apps, and are different from professional devices. And by this, Cooper means things like the little handheld signature collector thing that like UPS and FedEx have when they require a signature. That's like a professional device. It's a device that has software on it, so it's its own platform, but it's made for one profession, for one particular company. So that's what he means by professional devices. Each platform has its own physical form, display size and resolution, input method, network connectivity, operating system, and storage capacity. And so as you come up with an idea of what kind of platform is appropriate for your product, this is where you're going to come up with some alternatives. So maybe mobile phone apps work, and maybe a website that looks good on mobile also works. So those are two alternatives. So as an example, when you're coming up with what platform is appropriate, you really want to choose based on what you need to do and what the platform offers. So if your users need emergency notifications, you obviously are not going to do that through a website because people would have to be on the site to get them, and that doesn't make any sense. So you want to use a mobile phone. And I just had someone come into my office the other day, and they wanted to use Digital Publisher in the Adobe InDesign or Adobe Creative Suite to make a mobile phone app that would create notifications. Well, Digital Publisher is the software that allows people to make magazines for the iPad, so that doesn't really make sense. You're not going to use a platform, the iPad magazine store, for notifications because that's not what that platform offers. And another example, if you want to allow people to create 3D graphics, there's just no way they're doing it on their phone. The phone doesn't have a big enough display size for people to see all the complex controls making 3D graphics requires, and it doesn't have the input methods that you would need. You wouldn't be able to, 3D graphics, you need to be able to kind of grab. It's almost like sculpting clay. You need to be able to grab parts of your design and pull them out, and you wouldn't really be able to do that on a tiny little screen with your big fat finger. So you're not going to choose that platform. Okay, posturing. Posturing is the behavioral stance, how a digital product presents itself, and yes, I'm using puppies to explain this because I think after all the dense lectures you've had to sit through, I think puppies are an appropriate little break. So the reason I have puppies on here, puppies have posture. The puppy on the left is very clearly scared or upset. The puppy on the right is clearly trying to get your attention and wants you to play with it. So they have a behavioral stance, how they're presenting themselves. And the reason I bring this up is because digital products do the same thing. The product on the left looks very involved. Looks like there's a lot to do. It looks like you have to know a lot about what you're doing. The mobile product on the right looks like you don't really have to know anything. It looks like very simple. There's only 3 buttons on this screen right here, so that kind of makes it sound like, makes it look like you can manage this. You don't really have to pay a lot of attention to it. So these digital products are posturing as well. And the main question in figuring out what kind of posture to use, and I'll go over the postures in a second, is how much attention will users devote. So on the left, this definitely needs a lot of attention, and I can tell that right away because I see lots of text, lots of buttons, lots of small, tiny things I need to be aware of. This product on the right doesn't need my attention, and I can tell because everything's kind of big, like the important information is highlighted. I can understand what this is in about 3 seconds. How do you posture a digital product? How does it show how it's used and how much attention you need to look at it? Well, there's 3 different types of postures. Products that require a lot of attention are called sovereign. And this comes from the idea, reign, a kingship, someone reigning over, these products are reigning over your attention. They require a lot of attention. And they have lots of functions. They're usually grouped by relation, so grouped by what they do. They usually occupy the full screen, and they're document-centric. So they're used to create other documents that you can edit, save, move around, etc. So when a device or when a product is sovereign, you really have to pay attention to it. A transient product is a single function product. So something where you can come and go easily. It's usually bold and clear. And the example in your book is like Yahoo widgets, or when you have iTunes shrunk down to that little widget and it's literally just like play, stop, next. Very, very simple. They don't require a lot of your attention, and as a result, they sort of sit in the corner. Demonic products are products that work in the background, things you don't see. And if you've ever sent an email and you screwed up the email address, or someone's mailbox was full, and you get an email back that says your email couldn't be delivered, it's from Mailer Demon, and that's where the name demon comes from. It works in the background, just like, you know, the idea that demons possess someone invisibly. These demonic products are just working. You don't see them. They just do their thing. You barely even know. So you don't need an interface, really. You don't need anything. You might need a little bit of an interface, maybe to turn it off or on, but you don't need any attention. You don't need to give any attention. It just does its thing. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Web 2. Oh, actually, let me go back for a second. So as you're designing digital products in this class, you have to think about, is this going to be sovereign? Is it going to be transient? Or is it demonic? And I'll tell you right now, you're not going to do a demonic one because this isn't a coding class where you're making things that run in the background. So basically, is it going to be sovereign or transient? And that helps you understand how you can design it to meet user needs. Because transient, when users are using transient products, their need is for quick and easy access that requires little attention. So this helps you understand how to design your product for the attention span and the needs of your user. Okay, so one thing that's not discussed in your book, because it was just kind of happening around Cooper right after his book came out, is this idea of, well, Web 2.0 is a little bit older than that, but the idea of Web 2.0. And I'm sure many of you have heard about this, but just to make sure everyone now knows what it is. Web 2.0, this is a term that's been around for a while, is the idea of the web as a place to do something, not just to consume something. So web apps, software, SaaS or SaaS is software as a service. Rich media experiences where you go to the New York Times website and their story is this long scrolling story with slideshows, with videos, with places you can tweet, with share buttons. So Web 2.0 is this idea of doing things on the web and not just looking at things on the web. And I think it helps to go back and look at what happened before Web 2.0. So before we did things on the web, what was it like? And the reason I'm talking about this is I teach a class here at Ball State for the public relations sequence. And over the last couple years, I've talked about Web 2.0, and I'm starting to see now that most students don't really remember anything before Web 2.0. I used to be able to say, how many of you remember what websites were like in 1996, and people would know, but now I'm getting old, and so I think it helps if I show you what things were like, because if you're living in Web 2.0, I think it can be difficult to understand what's so great about it. So as an example, I found a really exciting example that is hilarious. What happened before Web 2.0? Well, the idea of the web before Web 2.0, when it was not doing but rather consuming, was this concept of web pages. No one says web page anymore. It's not really part of our vocabulary, but before Web 2.0, it was. So let's take a look at this really old website that the concept is web pages. So this is a site that Warner Brothers released to go with the Space Jam movie. You will not see a website for a movie like this anymore. Most movie websites, if you go to them now, they're very rich experiences. They have videos. They have social media you can participate in. Some of them have chat rooms. I mean, there's a lot to do. But back in the day, everything was just pages, and this is how you got to the pages. This was their navigation, which is a big no-no today. So you clicked and you went, and it was a page. So there's picture, there's some text, and there's just not a whole lot to it. Oh yeah, oh gosh, this is not gonna, yeah. This is their new store, and you can see they're pulling it in the website. Their old website stores down. Obviously, they don't use it anymore, so they're bringing the new one in. Yeah, the press box. Wow. Amazing, right? And here's no Space Jam news at the moment. And whenever there was news, someone would literally open this HTML file and type the news in. And that is not how Web 2.0 works. Now, everything is everything is on feeds, everything is on content management systems and blogs. So now when Warner Brothers has news, they just type it into a dashboard somewhere and it pops up on their site, and anyone who subscribed gets to know about it right away. So I think it can help to look at what happened before Web 2.0 to kind of get an idea of the difference. Web as web pages is the old idea. Web as doing something is Web 2.0. So with Web 2.0, you really can accomplish things. Chromebook, the idea of a Chromebook would not be possible without Web 2.0. A Chromebook is a laptop with no native software on it. Everything is done through the web. And you can do that now because the web is a place to do work. You have web apps like Dropbox and Mint.com, just endless web apps. Flickr, the Flickr photo organizer and editor, that allow you to do productive work through the web, and that wasn't possible before Web 2.0. A quick note, people are now starting to talk about Web 3.0, and this is the idea that the web is just going to help you be productive and give you answers to things. So in the idea of Web 3.0, you go to Google and you type in, like, I'm hungry. What's the best restaurant here that I can walk to? P.S. I'm vegan. And Google says, hey, you should go here. It's this far away. Here's a map. It has this many stars on Yelp. Here's what people are saying about it, and it just answers all of it for you. And you don't have to, you skip that step of going to Google and looking for what you think is important, and it just does that for you. But that's not really happening quite yet. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple issues in Web 2.0, and what's happening with Web 2.0 that's kind of changing our idea of platforms. So back when websites were just web pages, it was a platform that didn't do a whole lot. And now that platform is changing and it does a lot more. And Cooper was writing before the smartphone made everything amazing. And so I want to talk about some of the ideas behind Web 2.0 that are appropriate for smartphones and that make the mobile web especially usable and useful. So the first is responsive design. And this is a type of design in which websites resize for whatever device they're being viewed on. So in this demo of responsive design, if you're on a giant computer like I am, then you see the website in this manner. And then as the device shrinks, the website automatically resizes and moves itself. So it's not like 4 different websites. I'll pull this down so you can see the different sizes of the devices. It's not 4 different websites, it's one site that changes based on what you're looking at. So as the screen gets smaller, in this example things are getting closer. As it moves to a tablet, they're reorganized, and now there's lots of scrolling. And as it moves to a phone, it gets even skinnier, the navigation becomes different, and some of these areas drop out, some of the not very important areas that mobile users don't care about, things that people on the go aren't going to look at, disappear. So that's one issue in Web 2.0 that is allowing us to create mobile experiences that Cooper doesn't really touch on because this didn't exist when he was writing. So this week you have a couple readings on responsive design and what it means for interaction designers as they figure out what platform and posture they want to use. Another issue, mobile web. So Apple and Steve Jobs invented the iPhone, and you could make apps for it. Turns out that making apps is kind of hard. I'll talk about that next. I mean, not for people who know what they're doing, but for some company that's just like, oh, let's make an app. It's not super easy for them. So what a lot of businesses and organizations are doing now is creating mobile websites that look and behave like apps. So this is important for interaction designers because we're sort of having to sometimes make websites that look like apps, but they don't have the functionality of apps. These websites can't access the capabilities of a phone, for example. They can't access the camera on a phone and do something with that picture, like native apps, which are apps built specifically for mobile devices, can. So as an example, let me pull up Harvard's mobile site. Okay, here it is, and you can see this is responsive. So it would fit on anyone's mobile device, so it doesn't matter if someone's using Android or iPhone or Windows Phone, it's going to resize to fit their phone. It's a website, but it really looks like an app. So I can click on these different courses that are available and see information on them. Oops. Let's go back, shall we? I got into the loop on the map. Oh, here's the home page. So I'm back to the home page. Again, looks like a mobile app. I can look up, see I was in courses, so I can look at the course catalog. So it really looks like a native app, but it's not. It's just a website. But if I was on a phone, I would probably be none the wiser. So if I was on a phone, if I click that little phone, this is telling me it's going to pull up the phone number. So if I was on a phone and I click this, it would actually call the number. So I have access to some of the phone capabilities, but not all of them. This is another mobile site that acts as an app. I mean, it looks like an app, but it's not. And this one is discussed a lot as a good example of a mobile site that works like an app without being an app. So this is built in the same way you build a website. It uses HTML. It doesn't use any of the fancy languages that are needed to create native apps. So it's a little bit easier sometimes for companies to make. And it looks like an app. I can have drop downs, just like a lot of apps do. So it's using these patterns, which we'll talk about next week, that are common in apps. But I think it's pretty obvious that this is intending to look like an app. So you're going to read this week about whether these mobile sites are appropriate for helping users do something on a phone. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about native apps so that you have a good definition of what they are. So we've looked at responsive sites. We've looked at the mobile web, sites that are meant to mimic apps and allow people to do something on a mobile device. And then let's talk a little bit about native apps. So native apps are apps that are coded in whatever language is required for the mobile device. So if you're an Android developer, you are going to be writing in Java, and you're going to be using the Android SDK or developer kit, which is a series of tools that help you put the app together. If you're an iOS developer, you're going to be writing in Objective-C, a programming language, and you're going to be using the iOS SDK or the iOS developer kit or a program called Xcode. I mean, there's different options, but you basically have to play by Apple rules. So you have to use Objective-C, which they require for those native apps. That's how you write them. And then you have to play by whatever programming rules they give you. Same with Android. The good thing about native apps is they can access the phone capabilities. So if you have a native app, you can have it access the phone's camera and take pictures and tag it and do whatever you need the app to do for users to achieve their goals. So the big debate right now is kind of, what do we do? I have a product that I'm working on right now, and as I'm trying to sell it to people, everyone wants to know, is this a native app or is this a mobile web? And everyone wants something different. Some of the people I'm trying to sell to want the app to be native because of its capabilities. Some people want it to be on the mobile web so that everyone can use it, even if they have like a BlackBerry or Windows Phone, non-Android or iOS device, which are the most common devices native apps are built for. The big pain in the butt about native apps is you have to make one for each operating system. So if you're making an iOS app when you want to put it in Android, you've got to do some work to get it there. You can't just like send it to the Play Store and expect it to work, because it uses a different language and different rules. So you're going to do some readings kind of on what's going on with responsive, whether mobile web is the future, whether native apps are the future, and in this course, as you go through your thought process on your final project design, you'll have to think about what's the best platform for what I'm making. Should it be a mobile web site? Should it be a native app? Okay, if you have any questions about anything in this week's reading or lecture, please let me know. I'd be glad to answer them. And if not, I'll see you next week.